The human brain is so interesting and I really wanted to learn more about it, so I found this iceberg that goes over a lot of the neuroscience oddities, like just some obscure and cool stuff about the brain. So today in this video, I'm gonna be explaining this iceberg in a way that even someone like me, who knows absolutely nothing about science or all that smart person stuff, can still get something from it and really enjoy this and like understand it and like get to know all the cool stuff about the brain. So without further ado, be sure to subscribe, follow my Instagram, join my Discord, and yeah, let's get straight into this. So first of all, we're gonna talk about classical conditioning. So classical conditioning is a fundamental concept in psychology that explains how certain behaviors can be learned through association. It was first discovered by Ivan Pavlov, a Russian physiologist, through his experiments with dogs, which you may have heard of. Pavlov's work laid the foundation for understanding how organisms, including humans, learn to associate one stimulus with another, ultimately leading to our changes in behavior. So the process begins with the unconditional stimulus, or the US, which is something that naturally and automatically triggers a response without any prior learning. For example, in Pavlov's experiments, food served as this unconditional stimulus because it naturally caused dogs to salivate. The response to this stimulus, such as the dog's salivation, is known as the unconditional response, or UR. This response occurs naturally and does not require any learning or conditioning. Initially, there is a neutral stimulus, which is something that does not trigger the unconditioned response on its own. In Pavlov's case, the sound of a bell was used as this neutral stimulus. Before conditioning, ringing the bell had no effect on the dog's salivation. However, when the neutral stimulus is repeatedly paired with the unconditioned stimulus, the organism begins to associate the two stimuli, and then over time, the neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus. In Pavlov's experiments, after several pairings of the bell with the presentation of food, the dogs began to salivate in response to the bell alone. The bell, once a neutral stimulus, had now become a conditioned stimulus. The response that occurs in reaction to the conditioned stimulus is known as the conditioned response. This response is learned through the process of association. In Pavlov's experiments, the dog's salivation in response to the bell, even when no food was presented, is an example of a conditioned response. This response is similar to the unconditioned response, but is triggered by the conditioned stimulus rather than the unconditioned stimulus. Okay, this is kind of confusing, but we're gonna get past it, guys. So what it all boils down to is just that classical conditioning demonstrates how behaviors can be learned through association. It shows that organisms can respond to new stimuli in their environment by forming connections between previously unrelated stimuli. This process of learning through association is not limited to dogs, though. It applies to humans as well. For example, if a person hears a particular song repeatedly while experiencing a specific emotion, they may eventually associate that song with that emotion. This learned association can lead to the person feeling the same emotion whenever they hear the song in the future. It's like, have you ever had a song set to be your alarm, and if you ever hear that song or just whatever your alarm sound is, you get grumpy and a little sleepy, you're like, oh god. It's that kind of thing. Understanding classical conditioning helps explain a wide range of behaviors, and it can be applied to various fields, including education, therapy, and marketing. For instance, in education, teachers can use classical conditioning to create positive learning environments by associating learning activities with positive stimuli, such as praise or rewards. In therapy, classical conditioning principles can be used to help individuals overcome phobias or anxiety by gradually exposing them to the feared object or situation in a controlled and positive way. Also, in marketing, advertisers use classical conditioning to create associations between their products and positive emotions, like happiness or excitement. So this is just the very basics. Okay, before we go any further, let's cover some terms that we're gonna need to know for later on in this video. So this might be just a little bit boring, but come on, trust me, it's gonna be worth it in the end. We just gotta understand this stuff first. So, firstly, the brain. The brain is the control center of the body, located in the skull. It's like a supercomputer made up of billions of nerve cells called neurons. The brain is responsible for everything we do, from basic survival functions like breathing and heartbeat to complex activities like thinking, feeling emotions, and remembering things. It's divided into different regions, each with its own special tasks, like processing what we see or hear, controlling movement, and managing our speech. Next up, we have neurons. Neurons are the fundamental units of the brain and nervous system, responsible for receiving sensory input from the external world, processing this information, and then sending out instructions to your muscles and glands. Think of them as tiny messengers that transmit electrical and chemical signals throughout your body. Each neuron has a cell body, dendrites, which receive signals, and an axon, which sends signals to other neurons. Next up, we have glia, or glial cells. Glial cells are the support staff of the brain. They don't transmit signals like neurons, but they play a crucial role in maintaining the health of neurons, providing them with nutrients, cleaning up debris, and insulating neurons to ensure that signals are transmitted efficiently. They help keep everything in the brain running smoothly. Next up, we have an illusion. An illusion is a distortion of the senses, revealing how the brain normally organizes and interprets sensory stimulation. When you experience an illusion, what you perceive doesn't match the actual reality. For example, optical illusions trick your eyes and brain into seeing something different from what's really there, like a straight line looking bent underwater or a drawing appearing to move when it's actually static. Next up, we have awareness. Awareness is a state of being conscious of something. It's your ability to perceive, feel, and be conscious of events, objects, thoughts, emotions, or sensory patterns. For example, when you're aware of a sound, you hear it and recognize it. Awareness can also refer to being mindful of your own thoughts and feelings. Then a reflex. A reflex is an automatic, involuntary response to a stimulus. It's something that your body does without you having to think about it. For example, when you touch something hot, you immediately pull your hand away without having to think about it. This happens because the signal bypasses your brain and is instead processed by your spinal cord for a quick response. Okay, this one's a little different. A lobotomy. A lobotomy is a now largely discredited surgical procedure that was once used to treat severe mental illness. It involves cutting or scraping away most of the connections to and from the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of the brain. The idea was to calm patients with severe psychiatric conditions, and it often resulted in significant personality changes, cognitive impairments, and other negative effects. Next up, we have rapid eye movement, or REM sleep. REM sleep is a state of sleep characterized by rapid movements of the eyes, vivid dreams, and a high level of brain activity similar to when you're awake. It's an essential part of the sleep cycle, and it plays a crucial role in memory consolidation, learning, and mood regulation. During REM sleep, your muscles are usually paralyzed to prevent you from acting out your dreams. Neurodiversity. Now, this is the concept that variations in the human brain and cognition, such as autism, ADHD, and dyslexia, are natural and valuable forms of human diversity. It emphasizes that these neurological differences should be respected and supported, rather than viewed as deficits or disorders that need to be cured. The neurodiversity movement advocates for the inclusion and acceptance of all individuals regardless of their neurological makeup. Trepanation. Trepanation is an ancient medical procedure that involves drilling or scraping a hole into the human skull. Now, historically, it was believed to treat various conditions like headaches, mental disorders, and to release evil spirits. In modern times, though, it's considered dangerous and it's not a standard medical procedure, though it remains a topic of historical and anthropological interest. I mean, the fact that humans thought that was like a good thing to do at one point is kind of scary. But also, I mean, like 60 years ago, we were still giving lobotomies to people, so I don't know, humans are just kind of stupid. Okay, now really quick, I'm going to explain neuroimaging and neurolinguistics, and then we're going to go into the second layer where stuff gets really interesting and cool. So neuroimaging is a field that involves techniques to visualize the brain's structure and function without surgery. Common methods include MRI and fMRI, which provide detailed images of the brain and measure activity by detecting changes in blood flow. PET uses radioactive material to show brain metabolism and detect abnormalities, while EEG records electrical activity in the brain to study brain waves and diagnose conditions such as epilepsy. Now, neurolinguistics. This field studies the relationship between language and the brain, exploring how different brain areas process and produce language. Key regions include Broca's area, which is important for speech production and grammar, and Wernicke's area, which is crucial for language comprehension. Damage to these areas can result in language disorders such as aphasia. Neurolinguistics also examines how the brain manages multiple language and bilingual individuals, and it uses neuroimaging techniques to map out language-related neural networks and processes. Okay, and with that, we're going on to the next layer of this iceberg. So first of all, we're going to talk about the triune brain. The triune brain is a model of the brain's evolutionary development proposed by neuroscientist Paul MacLean in the 1960s. It suggests that the human brain is composed of 3 distinct regions that evolved at different times and serve different functions. This model helps to explain the complexity of human behavior by showing how different parts of the brain interact and contribute to various aspects of our lives. The oldest part of the brain in this model is the reptilian complex, often referred to as the reptilian brain. This part includes structures such as the brainstem and the basal ganglia. It's responsible for basic survival functions that are largely instinctual and automatic, such as heart rate, breathing, and fundamental behaviors like aggression, dominance, and territoriality. The reptilian brain is named because these functions are similar to those found in reptiles, which rely heavily on these primal instincts for survival. Next in the evolutionary timeline is the paleo-mammalian complex, commonly known as the limbic system. This part of the brain evolved after the reptilian complex and is crucial for emotions and memories. It includes structures like the amygdala, hippocampus, and hypothalamus. The limbic system is responsible for emotional responses, forming memories, and basic drives such as hunger, sex, and parental behaviors. It helps mammals, including humans, to navigate complex social environments by processing emotions and forming social bonds. The most recent addition in evolutionary terms is the neo-mammalian complex, also known as the neocortex. This part of the brain is unique to mammals and is particularly well developed in humans. It's responsible for high-order functions such as reasoning, planning, language, and complex thought processes. The neocortex allows for advanced cognitive abilities, including abstract thinking, problem solving, and the ability to learn from experience. It enables humans to engage in sophisticated communication, culture, and technology. Next, let's talk about neuroanthropology. Neuroanthropology is a really fascinating field that blends neuroscience and anthropology. Imagine trying to understand how our brains and cultures influence each other. That's what neuroanthropology is all about. It looks at how different cultural practices, beliefs, and social structures can actually shape our brain's processes and behaviors. For example, think about how growing up in a community that values storytelling might affect the brain's language and memory systems, or how practicing meditation in a culture that emphasizes mindfulness could change the brain's stress response. Neuroanthropologists study these kinds of connections, showing us that our brains are not just influenced by biology, but also deeply shaped by our cultural experiences, which is really interesting to think about. Next is neurocomputing. Neurocomputing is another intriguing area. It combines neuroscience with computer science to try to create computer systems that kind of mimic the way that our brains work. Think of it as building computers that can learn and think more like humans. This field looks at how neurons in our brains process information and tries to replicate these processes in artificial neural networks. This is really insane to me because I've always wondered, like, how does our brain do it? Like, how does our brain, it's made of just cells, but it has like this whole intricate computer. Like, it's really interesting. These artificial networks, though, are the foundation for technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning. So when you use a voice assistant like Siri or see recommendations on Netflix, that's neurocomputing in action. It's about creating smarter, more efficient computing systems that can adapt and learn from experience, much like our brains do. So next up, we got a fun one. Let's talk about homunculuses. Homunculuses, often depicted as small, eerie, and humanoid creatures, have an intriguing history that blends alchemy, mythology, and science fiction. The term homunculus is actually Latin for little man, and these miniature beings have fascinated people for centuries. The concept of the homunculus dates back to ancient and medieval alchemy. Alchemists, who were the forerunners of modern chemists, believed that it was possible to create a tiny, fully formed human through various mystical and scientific processes. One of the most famous accounts comes from Paracelsus, a Swiss physician and alchemist from the 16th century. He claimed that by placing semen in a sealed container and burying it in horse manure for 40 days, it would develop into a tiny human-like creature. Paracelsus's recipe might sound bizarre, but it reflects the blend of mysticism and early science that characterize a lot of alchemical practices. The idea of homunculus also found its way into literature and folklore. These tiny beings were sometimes depicted as helpers or servants to the creators, often possessing special knowledge or abilities. However, they were also seen as unsettling or grotesque, embodying the fears and anxieties associated with tampering with nature or life itself. In today's world, the idea of the homunculus has shifted from creepy, alchemical experiments to something much more intriguing and symbolic, especially in the realms of consciousness and neuroscience. So first, let's talk about the cortical homunculus. Imagine your brain has a map of your entire body, but it's not a normal map. Instead, it's like one of those wacky carnival mirrors that distort your reflection. This map is called the cortical homunculus. In this map, parts of your body are exaggerated based on how much brain power they need. Your hands and face, for example, are shown much larger because they need lots of nerves and require precise movements and sensations. This visual representation helps scientists understand how different parts of the brain control different parts of the body. It's not an actual tiny person person in your brain, but a tool that looks like a distorted human figure to show which areas of the body take up more brain space. Next, let's dive into the homunculus argument in philosophy. This idea asks us to think about how we become aware of our own thoughts. Imagine there's a tiny person inside your head watching everything you see and hear, like a little inner observer, and that's how we have consciousness. But then here's the tricky part. If there's a tiny person in your head, do they have an even tinier person in their head watching their thoughts? And so on? This leads to an infinite regress, which is a fun way for philosophers to explore the complexities of consciousness and self-awareness. Okay, and then moving on to the part that you've probably heard this word from, pop culture. There's a fascinating YouTube series where, that guy tries to make his own little homunculus. But, to be fair guys, these videos are more entertainment than serious science, so be careful. Alright, next let's talk about neurochips. Imagine having a tiny, sophisticated device that can seamlessly interact with your brain. This is what a neurochip is. These microchips are designed to interface directly with the nervous system, offering remarkable potential for both medical and technological breakthroughs. At its core, a neurochip is a small electronic device that can be implanted in the brain or attached to nerves. Think of it as a high-tech bridge connecting your biological brain with digital technology. These chips are composed of numerous electrodes capable of both stimulating and recording neural activity. This two-way communication allows the brain to send signals to the chip and the chip to send signals back to the brain. Your brain operates through a complex network of electrical signals. Neurons communicate by firing off tiny electrical currents, which create everything from thoughts to memories to movements and sensations. A neurochip taps into this network. By implanting electrodes in specific areas of the brain, the chip can pick up on the electrical activity of neurons. When neurons fire, they produce these electrical currents, and the neurochip captures this activity, processes the information, and can then send electrical impulses back to neurons. This way, it can read what the brain is doing or influence its behavior. One of the most exciting uses of neurochips is in the medical field. They have the potential to revolutionize treatment for neurological disorders. For instance, neurochips can help restore movement in paralyzed individuals by bypassing damaged spinal cords, directly stimulating the necessary pathways for movement. They also hold promise for treating conditions like epilepsy, Parkinson's disease, and depression by providing precise brain stimulation tailored to each condition. Beyond medical treatments, neurochips are making waves in the realm of prosthetics and sensory enhancement. Imagine advanced prosthetic limbs controlled directly by thoughts. An amputee could simply think about moving a limb and the prosthetic would respond in real time, just like a normal arm would. Similarly, neurochips could restore lost senses such as vision or hearing by stimulating the corresponding brain areas, allowing individuals to experience the world in ways previously thought impossible. Taking it a step further into the future, neurochips are key to developing brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs. BCIs create direct communication pathways between the brain and external devices like computers or robotic arms. This means that people could potentially control computers, drive vehicles, or operate machinery just by thinking about it. The implications are profound, offering new ways to interact with technology and the world around us. But it is just a little bit scary. Alright, the next one we're going to talk about has been really interesting to me. I don't know if you've been on my channel for that long, but I started out talking about aesthetics in this channel, and the next thing we're going to talk about is neuroaesthetics. Neuroaesthetics is a fascinating and relatively new field that combines neuroscience with the study of aesthetics. It seeks to understand how our brains perceive and process beauty, art, and creativity. Imagine you're in a gallery standing in front of a painting that moves you deeply. You might wonder why this particular piece evokes such strong emotions. Neuroaesthetics aims to uncover the brain mechanics behind these experiences. So, at its core, neuroaesthetics explores how different forms of art, whether visual, musical, or literary, affect our brain's neural circuits. By using tools we already talked about like MRI and EEG, scientists can observe which areas of the brain are activated when we engage with art. For instance, when you listen to a beautiful piece of music, specific regions of your brain associated with emotion, memory, and reward light up. These insights help explain why art can evoke such powerful and varied emotional responses. Now, one key aspect of neuroaesthetics is understanding why we find certain things beautiful or aesthetically pleasing. It turns out that our brains are wired to respond to particular patterns, symmetry, and proportions. This is why many people might find a symmetrical face more attractive, or why certain color combinations in a painting can be particularly pleasing to the eye. Our brain's reward system, which releases dopamine, a feel-good transmitter, plays a significant role in these perceptions. When we see something we find beautiful, our brain's reward centers are activated, making us feel pleasure and satisfaction. Neuroaesthetics also delves into how art can influence our mental state and well-being. Engaging Working with art can reduce stress, enhance cognitive function, and even improve mood. This has led to the growing field of art therapy, where creating or experiencing art is used as a therapeutic tool to help people cope with mental health issues, trauma, and stress. Next up, we have the 10% of the brain usage. The "we only use 10% of our brains" myth is like one of those things that sounds kinda legit when you first hear it, but when you think about it, is totally ridiculous. It's the kind of thing that gets tossed around in motivational speeches or sci-fi movies like Lucy or whatever, where someone magically unlocks their full brain and becomes some kind of super genius, throwing cars around with telekinesis and shit. But here's the truth. The whole 10% of your brain thing is straight cap. First off, neuroscience has already debunked it. Your brain is doing something all the time, even when you're just chilling, staring at the ceiling. Brain scans like fMRI and PET scans show activity in basically every part of your brain, depending on what you're doing. Even when you're asleep, different areas light up because your brain's never off. It's literally keeping you alive, running everything from your heartbeat to your dreams about missing class because you forgot to put on pants. The myth probably got started because someone misunderstood early research about how neurons work, or saw a quote from a sketchy 19th century psychologist who claimed humans weren't reaching their full potential or whatever. Or maybe it was just people trying to sound fake. Either way, it's wrong. Evolution wouldn't give us this big calorie-burning organ if 90% of it was just sitting there like unused tabs in your browser. Also think about it, if we only use 10%, what the fuck is the other 90% doing? Hanging out? Playing Fortnite? If 90% of your brain got damaged, you'd be in serious trouble, not walking around fine like you're in some kind of anime power-up arc. So yeah, that's just complete BS. Next up, we got schizophrenia. Alright, so schizophrenia is one of those mental illnesses that people think they know about, but most of what they think is just straight up wrong, or just oversimplified. Like if someone says schizo, your brain probably jumps to that movie stereotype of hearing voices telling them to do crazy stuff, right? And while hallucinations can be a thing, schizophrenia is way more complicated than that. First off, schizophrenia isn't just one thing. It's a spectrum of symptoms that can hit differently depending on the person. At its core, it's a mental disorder that messes with how someone thinks, feels, and interprets reality. Imagine your brain's filter for what's real and what's not just stops working the way it should. For some people, this means hallucinations, like hearing voices or seeing things that aren't there. But for others, it's delusions, like being super convinced of something that isn't true no matter what anyone says. And then there's also stuff like disorganized thinking, where someone's thoughts are jumping around, but none of them are really loading properly. What's wild is that it doesn't just affect thoughts and perception, it hits emotions too. People with schizophrenia might have flat affect, which basically means they show little to no emotion even when they really are feeling stuff inside. Or they might struggle with something called anhedonia, where things that used to be fun or exciting just aren't anymore. And don't even get me started on how it can mess with basic daily life, like keeping up with school, work, or relationships. So what causes schizophrenia? Honestly, no one knows for sure. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Scientists think it's a mix of genetics, brain chemistry, and environmental factors. If you've got a family history of schizophrenia, your risk goes up, but it's not a guarantee. And there's evidence that imbalances in brain chemicals like dopamine play a role, but again, it's not the whole story. Stress, trauma, and even things like prenatal infections might also tip the scale. Here's the thing though, schizophrenia really isn't as common as you might think. It affects about 1% of the population. But for the people who have it, it's not just a quote mental illness, it's like their whole entire world is rewritten. That's why treatment is so important. Meds like antipsychotics can help manage symptoms, but they're not a magic fix. Therapy and support systems are huge too, because this disorder doesn't exist in a vacuum. It impacts everything, your sense of identity, your place in the world, and how you connect with other people. And let's talk about the stigma for a sec too, because it's brutal. The media doesn't help with its obsession with portraying people with schizophrenia as dangerous or unpredictable. In reality, most people with schizophrenia are way more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators. Plus, the stigma makes it harder for people to get help because who wants to be labeled as crazy or misunderstood by literally everyone? Yeah, so it sucks. Okay, next up we have face blindness. Okay, so face blindness, aka prosopagnosia, is one of those conditions that sounds like a straight out of a quirky indie film, but is really real and can be seriously life-altering. If you never heard of it, it's basically when someone has trouble trouble recognizing faces, even people they know really well. Like, imagine not being able to pick out your best friend out of a crowd or even recognize your own reflection in the mirror sometimes. Wild, right? So let's break it down. Prosopagnosia isn't about bad memory or being unobservant, so don't go ahead and send this video to that one friend who can't remember anybody's name, because it's not the same thing. It's a legit brain condition caused by a glitch in the fusiform gyrus, a part of the brain that specializes in facial recognition. For most people, this area lights up like Times Square when they see someone's face, helping them process all the little details that make a face familiar, like the shape of someone's eyes, the curve of their smile, or even how their eyebrows sit. But for someone with face blindness, it's like their brain forgets to send the memo. The face is there, but the recognition part isn't. There are levels to this too. Some people have mild prosopagnosia where they just need more time or extra context, like someone's hairstyle or voice, to figure out who they're talking to. But for others, it's so severe that all faces look like strangers, even their own family. Imagine how awkward that could get in social situations. Like, hey, I know we've met 5 times, but remind me who you are again? Except they're saying that to their boss or a friend that they've known for like years. Yikes. And it's not just about recognizing people at parties either. Face blindness can mess with basic stuff like following TV shows, because let's be real, if all the characters look the same, you're doomed. Or remembering characters in video games. Some people even struggle with recognizing emotions on faces, which can make social interactions way harder. Well, what causes it though? Well, prosopagnosia can be congenital, meaning you're born with it, or acquired after a brain injury, stroke, or some other neurological issue. Fun fact, a lot of people with the congenital type don't even realize they have it for a long time because they just think everyone struggles with faces as much as they do. They'll rely on workarounds like recognizing people by their clothes, haircuts, or how they walk, and they might not even notice that that's not how everyone else operates. There's no cure for face blindness, but people who have it come up with creative strategies to navigate life. They'll memorize distinctive features like someone's glasses or that one mole on their cheek, or they'll pay extra attention to voices, body languages, and even scents. Not creepy at all, right? And if all else fails, they'll just straight up ask people to remind them who they are. A bold move, but honestly, kind of iconic. But let's not forget the emotional side of it. Prosopagnosia can feel super isolating, especially when people just don't get it. Like, imagine someone thinking that you're rude or uninterested just because you didn't recognize them. It's not like you can whip out a PowerPoint mid-conversation and explain your brain's quirks. So yeah, people with face blindness often deal with a ton of unnecessary guilt and social anxiety on top of the condition itself, which really sucks and it's scary. And if you have that out in my viewers, I won't judge you, I promise. The Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. And from here on out, I'm just gonna refer to it as CJD, okay? This shit is like the stuff of science fiction, but it's horrifyingly real. It's a rare brain-melting disease that is as freaky as it sounds. Think of it as the brain's worst-case scenario. A super fast, irreversible breakdown that turns everything to chaos. The nickname human mad cow disease gets thrown around sometimes, and while that's not totally accurate, it does give you an idea of how intense this is. So what is CJD? It's a part of a group of diseases called prion diseases. Now, prions are like the ultimate villains in biology. Unlike viruses or bacteria, which are alive and need to invade your body to wreak havoc, prions are just messed up proteins. They're not alive, but they're super contagious on a molecular level. These bad proteins show up and convince your normal brain proteins to join their evil little club. And when that happens, your brain starts to develop holes, literally turning spongy. Yeah, it's gross and terrifying. There are a few types of CJD. The classic version can show up randomly, which is called sporadic CJD, which accounts for most cases. It can get inherited, which is called familial CJD, thanks to some unlucky genetics. Or in super rare cases, it can be acquired, like through contaminated medical equipment or eating infected meat in the case of the related variant CJD, aka mad cow. But no matter how you get it, the outcome is devastating. Once the symptoms hit, it's game over in less than a year for most people. Speaking of symptoms, they start subtle, like a glitch in the Matrix. Maybe someone seems a little off, confused, or clumsy, but it doesn't stay subtle for long. Pretty soon, it escalates to full-on neurological mayhem. Severe memory loss, hallucinations, personality change, changes, jerky movements, and eventually a complete loss of control over basic functions. It's like watching someone's brain shut down piece by piece, which is honestly as heartbreaking as it is horrifying. The scariest part is that there's no cure. Zip. Nada. Doctors can try to manage symptoms and keep someone comfortable, but once the prions start their attack, there's no stopping them. Scientists are working on understanding prions better because, let's be honest, they're a biological nightmare. But right now, CJD is one of those diseases where prevention is your best bet, especially when it comes to avoiding the acquired version. Fun fact, this is why we have strict rules about sourcing blood and handling medical equipment, because nobody wants prions getting in the mix. And yeah, the whole mad cow association with variant CJD did a number on public perception. Back in the 90s, there was a massive freakout over beef contamination in Europe, and honestly for a good reason. A small number of people who ate infected meat ended up with the prion disease, and it was a disaster. That said, those cases are super rare now because of strict regulations, but the legacy of the fear still lingers. CJG is also one of those diseases that reminds us how little we actually understand about the brain. Like, prions don't follow the usual rules of infection, they don't even have DNA. They're just broken proteins causing chaos, and that alone is enough to make your brain feel like it's glitching out just thinking about it. So yeah, this disease is terrifying, but it's also fascinating a little bit in like that wow, biology is terrifying kind of way. A little bit. Next up, we got alien hand syndrome, or AHS. This is something that sounds straight out of a horror movie, but is 100% real, and it's as weird as it sounds. Imagine your hand just doing its own thing, like it has its own brain and zero interest in listening to you. It's not fidgety or uncoordinated, it's fully going rogue, grabbing stuff, smacking you in the face, or doing whatever it feels like without your permission. Honestly, it's giving possessed by a ghost vibes, but the explanation is way more science-y. Here's what's happening. Alien hand syndrome is a super rare neurological condition where one of your hands acts completely independently from your conscious control. Like you'll be chilling and suddenly your hand starts unbuttoning your shirt or reaching for something without you telling it to. People with AHS have literally said it feels like the hand belongs to someone else, which is where the whole alien thing comes in. And if you think that sounds terrifying, you're absolutely right. It's like your body is straight up betraying you. So what causes this? It's usually happening because of brain damage or certain neurological conditions like after a stroke, brain surgery, or some intense trauma to the corpus callosum, which is the part of your brain that lets the left and right hemispheres communicate. And when that connection gets messed up, it's like the two sides of your brain start working independently, and one of them is like, you know what, I'm in charge now. And boom, alien hand. What's wild is how specific it can be. Most of the time, it's only one hand going rogue, not both. And it's not just random movement, sometimes it feels intentional. People have reported their alien hand undoing what their controlled hand is doing, like one hand zipping up their jacket while the other unzips it. It's giving chaotic neutral energy, and honestly, it's horrifying. But it's not all physical chaos, there's a huge mental toll too. AHS can be super frustrating and embarrassing, especially in public. Imagine your hand suddenly slapping someone for no reason or grabbing something off a stranger's plate at dinner. Like, how do you even explain that? Sorry, my hand's got a mind of its own. Yeah, that's gonna go over great. There's no straight up cure for alien hand syndrome, but people can manage it with therapy and some creative hacks. For example, they might keep the alien hand busy with objects it can fidget with or train it to chill out through repetitive tasks. It's all about trying to reclaim some control over the chaos. The brain is fucking wild, bro. Next up, we got the skull and brain are parasites, also known as encephalization theory. So the skull and brain are parasites idea, which is linked to this thing called the encephalization theory, is this kind of concept that sounds like it's a conspiracy theory that someone cooked up at 3 a.m. after scrolling way too deep into the weird fucked side of TikTok. But let's break it down because it's totally bizarre and interesting. The gist of it is that the skull and brain might not be working for you as much as you think. Instead, this theory frames them as parasites that evolved to control and manipulate the body for their own survival and reproduction. Like, your brain isn't the loyal pilot you think it is, it's more like a power-hungry tyrant that hijacked your body to ensure its own continuation. Creepy, right? Here's the why behind the theory. Over millions of years, brains got bigger and more complex through evolution, especially in mammals like us. This process, called encephalization, was supposedly to help us become smarter and better at surviving. But some thinkers argue that it wasn't about us surviving, it was about the brain becoming the dominant player. According to this idea, your body exists mainly as a life support system for your brain. Your heart pumps, your lungs breathe, your stomach digests, also your brain can keep vibing and sending out its commands. The skull comes into play because it's like the brain's bodyguard, a literal armor that evolved to protect its squishy, fragile overlord. Some people take this theory to the extreme and claim that the brain hijacks resources from the rest of the body to fuel itself, like a parasite draining its host. Think about it, the brain is a calorie monster, burning through about 20% of your body's energy even though it only makes up 2% of its weight. It's out here acting like a high-maintenance fucking diva while the rest of your body does all the heavy lifting. Kinda sus. And while this theory is definitely edgy and out there, it's not entirely baseless. In a way, you can think of your brain as being a bit selfish. It prioritizes its survival above all else, which is why you might get a head rush when blood flow dips for even a second, or why it has so many layers of protection from the skull to the blood-brain barrier while other organs are out here raw-dogging the elements. The brain knows it's a VIP and it acts like it, but calling it a parasite, that's where scientists would pump the brakes. A parasite usually harms its host to benefit itself, and while the brain can be a little resource hungry, it's not actively trying to hurt you. In fact, it's the command center keeping you alive, making sure you don't walk into traffic or forget to eat. So yeah, the brain might be selfish, but it's more symbiotic than parasitic. The whole skull and brain of parasites thing is more of a philosophical take than a legit scientific theory. It's about flipping the narrative and questioning whether our brains are really us, or if they're just some bossy freeloaders that tricked our bodies into doing their bidding. It's the kind of idea that makes you want to stare into space for a while and rethink everything. Are you the brain, or are you just a meat puppet for it? Who's really in charge here? Next up, we got exploding head syndrome. Now this shit sounds like some terrifying Michael Bay level disaster happening inside your skull, but it's not as dramatic or deadly as it sounds. It's actually a weird and pretty rare sleep disorder where you hear a super loud noise like an explosion, crash, or even gunfire just as you're falling asleep or waking up. And the catch is that it's all in your head. There's no actual sound, but it feels so real that it can freak you out hard. Here's about how it goes down. You're lying there, chilling, maybe scrolling through your phone one last time, which is a bad idea by the way. And as you start to doze off, boom, your brain decides to fire off what feels like the world's loudest sound effect. It's like your body was this close to letting you sleep and your brain just said, let's make this weird. The noise can vary a lot depending on the person. Some people describe it as a literal explosion, while others hear banging doors, crashing cymbals, or even electrical zapping sounds. Sometimes there's a bright flash of light, like your brain is really committed to the drama. The whole thing usually lasts just a few seconds, but it can leave you wide awake, heart racing, and wondering if you've ever lost your mind. But here's the good news. Exploding head syndrome is harmless. Yeah, it's scary in the moment, but it's not a sign of anything serious like a stroke or brain damage. Scientists aren't 100% sure what causes it, but they think it has something to do with your brain messing up the transition between being awake and asleep. Normally, as you fall asleep, your brain slowly turns off different systems, kind of like shutting down a computer. But with EHS, there is like a glitch in the system, and instead of powering down, your brain hits the blow shit up button. Stress and sleep deprivation seem to make it worse, which tracks because your brain is already acting weird when you're overtired or anxious. It can happen more often if you're prone to other sleep disorders like insomnia or sleep paralysis, which is another spooky one. Some people only experience it once or twice in their lives, while others might deal with it regularly. And yeah, there's not much you can do about it other than just try to manage your stress levels and get decent sleep. Knowing it's harmless helps too, because half the fear comes from thinking there's something really wrong. Like once you realize your brain is just being a drama queen, it's a little easier to roll over and just go back to sleep. Next up, we get the Frey effect. The Frey effect is straight up sci-fi level weirdness, but it's actually real and is backed by science. Basically, it's this phenomenon where people hear sounds like clicks, pops, or even voices when exposed to certain types of microwave radiation. Yeah, microwaves can make you hear things. No earbuds, no speakers, just your brain acting like a radio receiver for some invisible waves. Here's the sciencey breakdown. The Frey effect is named after Alan H. Frey, the scientist who first documented it in the 1960s. He found that when people were exposed to pulsed microwave radiation, they reported hearing noises that weren't actually there. What's happening is that the microwaves cause tiny thermal expansions in your brain tissue. These expansions create pressure waves that your auditory system picks up as sound. So technically, you're not hearing the microwaves themselves, it's more like your brain is translating them into noise. It's wild, right? Even wilder, this happens without damaging your hearing or your brain, as far as we know. The effect has been studied for decades, mainly because because of its potential military and communication applications. Like, imagine sending a message directly into someone's head without them needing any kind of device. Creepy and cool. Of course, this has led to some conspiracy theory level chatter. The idea that microwaves could be used to beam voices into people's heads has been tied to stories about government experiments, secret weapons, and even claims of mind control. Some of these stories stem from real experiments like those conducted during the Cold War, when both the US and Soviet Union were looking into microwave technology for all kinds of purposes. Some practical, some straight up spooky. But before you go full tinfoil hat, it's worth noting that the Frey effect is not magic, and it's definitely not the same as mind control. It's just a physical phenomenon where microwaves interact with your auditory system in a very specific way. There's no evidence that it can implant thoughts or manipulate your actions. So sit down, Kira. If you're hearing voices, it's probably not microwaves, but you might still want to talk to somebody about that. Alright, next up we got unique neuronal anomaly found in alien abductees. This one, bro, fucking buckle up. This one's stupid. But it's so funny. Okay, this is where science meets like X-Files type shit. As researchers and enthusiasts have dug into the stories of self-proclaimed abductees, the concept of this idea of unique neuronal anomalies found in alien abductees has gotten a lot of attention, surprisingly, even among some scientists. So let's unpack this because it's wild. The neuronal anomaly theory comes from the idea that people who claim to have been abducted by aliens might actually share some kind of neurological or physiological trait that sets them apart. These are people who report eerily consistent experiences: missing time, strange lights, physical sensations of paralysis or floating, and of course, the classic images of gray, big-eyed beings conducting tests on them. For years, skeptics wrote these off as sleep paralysis, vivid dreams, or outright hoaxes. But then someone started asking the real question: what if there's something unique about their brains? Some studies, not a ton but enough to raise eyebrows, have looked at the brain activity of people who say they've been abducted. A particularly interesting finding came out in relation to the temporal lobe, a part of the brain involved in memory, sensory processing, and emotion. Temporal lobe anomalies have been linked to conditions like epilepsy and hallucinations, which made scientists wonder if these people might have brains that are just wired a little differently. Essentially, they speculated that a heightened sensitivity in the temporal lobe could cause vivid, dreamlike experiences that feel real, even if they're not. But it doesn't stop there. Some researchers also looked at functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI scans, and EEG scans of alleged abductees. The results hinted at unusual brainwave patterns in some cases, particularly during discussions of their experiences. Their brains seemed to light up differently compared to people without these experiences. Could this mean their brains are somehow primed for intense, vivid, and otherworldly experiences? Or could it point to a completely different neurological structure altogether? Here's where it gets even more bizarre. There's a subset of researchers who believe these anomalies might not be natural. Instead, they float the idea that these changes could be the result of external interference, something implanted or altered during the abduction. This ties into the more fringe theory that abductees have undergone neurological modifications, perhaps through implants or advanced alien technology. There are even stories of tiny, unexplained objects being removed from people's bodies that some claim are implants. Most of these have turned out to be mundane, like glass or metal fragments, but the idea persists and fuels the theory of deliberate alien intervention. Another intriguing angle is the genetic component. Could there be a hereditary factor that predisposes some people to these experiences? Some abductees report that abductions run in their families, with parents, siblings, or children describing similar encounters. If a unique neurological anomaly is involved, it raises the question of whether it's genetic and has been passed down, or if, in a more sci-fi twist, certain families are targeted for abductions because of their traits. Let's also touch on the skeptic's perspective, because honestly, it's not all aliens and secret brain implants. A lot of scientists argue that what we're seeing here is a combination of psychological phenomena like false memory, sleep paralysis, and the brain's tendency to fill in gaps in perception with something that feels meaningful. People with these brain anomalies might just be more prone to creating vivid, detailed narratives to explain strange sensations or experiences they can't otherwise process. Even if these experiences are rooted in natural brain quirks, it doesn't mean that they're fake. To the abductees, the experiences would feel 100% real. real. And if there really is a unique neuronal anomaly at play, it raises fascinating questions about the nature of perception, memory, and consciousness. Are these people tapping into some shared psychological experience? Are they more sensitive to stimuli the rest of us can't detect? Or, stay with me here, are their brains uniquely equipped to perceive something beyond our usual sensory range? Ultimately, the idea of a unique neuronal anomaly in alien abductees is still in the weird but maybe possible category. Whether it's an unexplained quirk of the brain or evidence of something way bigger and more otherworldly, it's a rabbit hole that gets deeper the more you dig. Next up, we got the God Helmet. The God Helmet is one of those things that sounds way too wild to be real, and honestly, that's because it kind of isn't. It's this infamous invention from the 90s that claimed to let you experience God, or at least something supernatural, by zapping your brain with electromagnetic waves. Think of it like a VR headset for spiritual awakenings, or more realistically, a gimmick that got way overhyped. Here's the deal. The God Helmet was created by a neuroscientist named Michael Persinger. The whole setup was super DIY, basically a snowmobile helmet wired up with magnets that stimulated specific parts of the brain, especially the temporal lobes. Persinger claimed that this could trigger all kinds of trippy experiences like feeling a divine presence, having out-of-body sensations, or even feeling like you were being watched by a ghost or alien. Sounds cool, right? Except the science behind it is super sketchy. The idea was based on real neuroscience. Your temporal lobes are responsible for things like processing memory, emotions, and sensory input, so messing with them can cause strange sensations. Persinger thought the helmet could mimic the brain's natural response to religious or mystical experiences. He ran a bunch of experiments where people wore the helmet, and a lot of them reported feeling something otherworldly. Cue headlines like "Scientist invents a machine that let you talk to God." But here's where it falls apart. Follow-up studies have totally failed to replicate those results. Like when independent researchers tried to recreate Persinger's experiments, most people felt nothing. The experiences people described during his tests, turns out they were probably the result of just suggestion and expectation. Basically, if you strap on a weird helmet and someone tells you it's gonna make you feel God's presence, your brain might just play along because, well, brains are weird like that. And it gets even messier. Some scientists who looked into Persinger's work say the whole thing was riddled with bias. Like, he wasn't running these tests blind. He already believed that the helmet worked, which might have influenced how he interpreted people's reactions. Plus, a lot of the supernatural effects people described could easily be explained by normal psychological phenomena, like hypnosis, sleep paralysis, or just being creeped out by the lab setting. The God Helmet became a pop culture phenomenon for a hot minute, showing up in documentaries and sparking debates about whether religious experiences are all in our heads. It even inspired sci-fi plots about hacking your brain to access higher dimensions. But as far as hard science goes, it's basically been debunked. It's less groundbreaking neuroscience and more cool story, bro. Next up, we got holonomic brain theory. So this theory was proposed by this guy named Carl Pribram, who was a neuroscientist, and it was inspired by holograms, like the laser-created 3D-looking holograms that show up on your credit card or in Star Wars. Pribram believed that your brain doesn't store information like a filing cabinet or a hard drive, instead encoding information in powers of waves. In a hologram, every part contains the whole image, just in smaller detail. So Pribram's big idea was that your brain stores memories and processes information in the same way, distributed across the brain with every piece containing a reflection of the whole. Wild, right? But it gets crazier. Pribram teamed up with quantum physicists like David Bohm, who believed the universe itself might work like a hologram. They combined their ideas to suggest that maybe your brain isn't just a hologram, it's part of a holographic universe. This is where things start sounding very simulation theory-esque, like what if reality is just waves of information and your brain is decoding it? The cool part about the holonomic brain theory is that it could explain stuff that regular neuroscience struggles with, like how we're able to recall entire memories from small triggers or process insane amounts of information at once. Imagine a hologram. If you cut off a small piece, you can still see the entire 3D image in that piece, just fuzzier. Pribram thought your brain might work like that, where even if parts of it get damaged, like from injury, you can still function because the information is distributed everywhere. Pretty mind-blowing, right? But before you start thinking this explains all of life's mysteries, here's the tea. Holonomic brain theory hasn't been proven. Like, it's definitely a vibe, but it's also kind of controversial in the science world. Most neuroscientists stick to more grounded theories about how the brain works. Neurons firing, synapses connecting, and all that regular biology stuff. The hologram metaphor is super fascinating, but not everyone's convinced that it's how things actually work. But at the end of the day, it's still hella fun. Next up, we got Sword Art Online got real. Alright, so Palmer Luckey, the guy who co-founded Oculus and basically kickstarted modern VR, went full mad scientist and created a VR headset that can literally kill you if you die in-game. Yeah, you heard that right. Inspired by the anime Sword Art Online, where people get trapped in a VR game and dying there means dying in real life, Luckey decided to bring that terrifying concept a step closer to reality. On November 6, 2022, which is the same date when the Sword Art Online incident happened in the anime, Luckey unveiled his modified VR headset. And it isn't your average gaming gear, it's rigged with 3 explosive charge modules aimed directly at the user's forebrain. These charges are connected to a photosensor that detects a specific red screen flash pattern, the kind you'd see on a game over screen. So if you bite the dust in the game, the headset's charges detonate and, well, game over for real. Luckey explained that this morbid creation is more of a thought-provoking art piece than a consumer product. He wanted to explore the idea of tying your real life to your virtual avatar, suggesting that such high stakes would make virtual experiences feel profoundly real. However, he also admitted that the system isn't foolproof and lacks anti-tamper mechanisms, which is why he hasn't dared to use it himself. While this might sound like a dystopian nightmare, it's important to know that Luckey's killer headset isn't available to the public, and it was likely intended to spark discussion about the future of VR and the ethical boundaries that we shouldn't cross. So no need to worry about your next VR session turning into a life or death scenario. Unless you're into that sort of thing, in which case, maybe rethink your gaming habits. Next up, we got brainjacking. So brainjacking sounds like something straight out of a dystopian sci-fi flick, but it's a legit concern in today's tech-driven world. Basically, it's the unauthorized hacking of brain implants, like those used in deep brain stimulation, which are devices implanted in the brain to help manage conditions like Parkinson's disease. These implants send electrical impulses to specific brain regions to alleviate symptoms. While they're game changers for many patients, their wireless capabilities make them vulnerable to cyber attacks. Researchers at the University of Oxford have highlighted the potential risks of brainjacking. They point out that malicious actors could exploit the wireless communication features of these implants to alter their settings without authorization. This could lead to severe consequences such as inducing pain, impairing motor function, or even manipulating behaviors by targeting areas of the brain involved in reward processing. The challenge here is balancing security with functionality. Enhancing security measures often means more complex systems, which can be harder for patients and healthcare providers to use. However, as brain implants become more common, it's crucial to address these vulnerabilities to protect patients from potential cyber threats. One of the big issues with brainjacking is that most brain implants weren't designed with cybersecurity as a top priority. These devices are primarily focused on improving quality of life for patients, so the developers weren't really thinking about hackers breaking into them. But now that the risks are becoming more apparent, researchers are sounding the alarm. For example, there's the potential for ransomware-style attacks. Imagine someone hacking into your brain implant and demanding money to stop messing with your motor functions or pain receptors. That's next level terrifying. And it's not just about malicious hackers. Even unintentional interference could cause serious harm. Think about how many wireless signals are flying around at any given moment. What if some rogue signal accidentally alters the programming of a brain implant? The consequences could range from minor inconveniences to life-threatening situations. But there is hope. Scientists and engineers are already working on solutions like encryption for communication between the implant and external devices, as well as authentication protocols to make sure only authorized users can access the system. Some are even exploring the possibility of air-gapped devices, ones that don't connect to the internet at all, to eliminate the risk of remote attacks. At the same time, this does raise a lot of ethical questions, like if a brain implant can be hacked, does that mean that your thoughts, emotions, or even your sense of self can be manipulated? It forces us to think about privacy and autonomy in a way we've never had to before. Who's responsible if something goes wrong? The manufacturer, the doctor, or the hacker? How do we ensure these technologies stay beneficial and don't become tools for control or exploitation? It's scary, but I'm glad that we have the best doctors working on this, Next up, we have shutdown. So the colostrum shutdown theory is one of those freaky neuroscience ideas that makes you question how much control you really have over your brain. The colostrum itself is this tiny, thin sheet of neurons buried deep in your brain. kind of like the VIP area of a club where all the important signals hang out. Scientists have been fascinated by it for years because it seems to act as a sort of control center for consciousness. Here's the wild part. Researchers discovered that stimulating the claustrum with specific electrical impulses can essentially shut down consciousness. Like flip a switch and boom, you're out. Not asleep, not unconscious in the traditional sense, but completely blank, like someone paused the game. And when they stop the stimulation, you come right back with zero memory of what just happened. It's like your brain went into airplane mode for a few seconds and then rebooted without any error messages. This discovery came from studies on epilepsy patients who already had electrodes implanted in their brains for treatment purposes. When researchers zapped the claustrum, it wasn't like the patients just fainted or fell asleep. Their eyes were open, they were sitting upright, but they were gone. No response, no awareness, just nothing. It's like a power button for the soul. So why does this matter? The claustrum might be the key to understanding how consciousness works or doesn't work. If it really is the brain's master conductor coordinating all the different areas involved in thought, perception, and awareness, then tinkering with it could reveal a lot about what makes us us. But it also raises some seriously existential and ethical questions, like if we can turn off consciousness, what does that mean for free will? Could this be used in medical settings, like during surgeries, or in more dystopian ways, like for interrogation or control? Of course, we're not there yet. The claustrum is still a bit of a mystery. We know it's connected to a ton of different brain regions, but we don't fully understand how it works. Is it really the boss of consciousness, or just a really important middle manager? And how does it decide which signals to prioritize? The idea of a shutdown button for consciousness is both fascinating and kind of terrifying. On one hand, it could revolutionize neuroscience and help with things like pain management or treating disorders like epilepsy and PTSD. On the other hand, the potential for misuse is definitely there. Imagine if someone figured out how to remotely trigger a claustrum shutdown. That's straight up like Black Mirror territory. Next up, we have the blind brain hypothesis, or BBH. This is one of those mind-bending ideas that sounds like philosophy and neuroscience had a baby. It's basically a theory about why we humans feel like we're so special, why we think we're these self-aware, conscious beings with free will, when in reality our brains might just be tricking us. Yeah, it's existential crisis fuel, so buckle up. BBH comes from philosopher and cognitive scientist R. Scott Bakker, who suggests that our brains are blind to how they actually work. Like they're running these incredibly complex computations all the time, processing sensory input, making decisions, forming thoughts, but they can't directly access or understand what's really going on under the hood. Instead, we get this simplified surface level experience of being conscious that feels complete, but is actually super limited. Think of it like this. Your brain is the ultimate multitasker, handling millions of tasks at once, but it's also terrible at introspection. It's like trying to debug a computer while only being able to see the output on the screen and not the actual code running in the background. So when you sit there thinking, wow, I'm so deep and self-aware, what you're really experiencing is just the brain's best guess at what it's doing, based on the tiny sliver of information that it has access to. And here's where it gets trippy. According to BBH, this blindness is why we think consciousness is some mysterious magical thing. Because our brains can't see their own inner workings, we assume there's something special or inexplicable about being aware, but really it's just an illusion, a byproduct of the brain's limitations. Consciousness isn't some grand metaphysical phenomenon, it's just the brain doing what it does, but without the full picture. BBH also has a lot to say about why we struggle to understand the brain itself. Neuroscience is making huge strides in mapping brain activity, but there's this constant question of how does all this physical stuff, like neurons firing, chemical reactions, turn into thoughts, feelings, and experiences? The blind brain hypothesis suggests that part of the reason this question feels so unsolvable is because the brain literally can't grasp its own complexity. It's like trying to read a book that's written in a language you don't know. It just doesn't have the tools to decode itself. And of course, this theory isn't without its skeptics. Some neuroscientists argue that BBH oversimplifies things or leans too heavily on the idea of blindness without fully explaining how the brain's limitations translate into the experience of consciousness. But even if it's not the full story, it's a fascinating lens through which to think about why our understanding of the mind feels so slippery. Next up, we got Neolithic neurosurgery. This one's gonna be a bit more, just funny. So this is exactly what it sounds like. People in the Stone Age performing surgeries on each other's skulls skulls, and somehow they didn't just instantly die, at least not always. It's one of those historical facts that feels too wild to be true, but there's solid evidence that early humans were out here doing brain surgery thousands of years before modern medicine was even a concept. The most common procedure that they performed was called trepanation, which is basically drilling or scraping a hole into the skull. Archaeologists have found skulls from as far back as 7,000 to 10,000 years ago that show signs of trepanation. And here's the kicker: a lot of these people survived the procedure. You can tell because the bone around the hole started to heal, which only happens if the person lived for weeks, months, or even years after the surgery. Now, why would anyone in the Neolithic era think that this was a good idea? Theories vary, but it was probably a mix of medical necessity and spiritual beliefs. Some researchers think trepanation was done to relieve pressure from head injuries like skull fractures or swelling caused by blunt force trauma. In those cases, it's kind of genius. If someone's brain is being crushed by a buildup of pressure, making a hole in their skull might actually save their life. But it wasn't all practical. A lot of the skulls that show trepanation don't have signs of injury, so it's likely they were doing this for spiritual or ritual reasons too. Maybe they thought it could cure mental illness, epilepsy, or migraines by releasing bad spirits out of the brain, or energy trapped in the head. It's giving ancient holistic vibes, but with way more blood and bone shavings. And let's talk about tools for a second, because these surgeries weren't happening in sterile hospitals with scalpels. Neolithic surgeons used sharp stones like obsidian or flint, and they had to do everything without anesthesics, antiseptics, or even antibiotics. Imagine someone chiseling into your skull with a rock while you're fully awake and probably like biting down on a stick or screaming into the void. Absolute nightmare fuel. What's even crazier is how widespread trepanation was. Skulls with these holes have been found all around the world, from Europe to the Americas to Africa. It wasn't just one culture doing this. It seems like a bunch of early humans figured out independently that sometimes cracking someone's skull open was worth the risk. And honestly, that's kind of impressive. Of course, not everyone made it. Some skulls show incomplete trepanations where the person either died mid-procedure or the surgeon just gave up. But the fact that anyone survived is a testament to how much we underestimate ancient humans. They didn't have textbooks, but they clearly knew enough about the human body and had enough courage to pull this off. Next up, we got image reconstruction from human brain activity. This sounds like some shit out of Black Mirror, but it's happening in real life. This is the science of using brain scans to read your thoughts and reconstruct the images that your brain is processing. Yeah, it's like turning your imagination or whatever you're looking at into something you can see on a screen. Creepy? Definitely. Fascinating? 100%. Here's how it works. Scientists use brain imaging technology, usually fMRI, which measures blood flow in the brain. The idea is that when you look at something or imagine it, specific parts of your brain light up in patterns that correspond to what you're seeing. By training an AI on these brain activity patterns, researchers can teach the system to recognize and construct the images associated with those patterns. For example, in recent experiments, participants were shown images while their brain activity was recorded with fMRI. After collecting enough data, AI models were able to decode the brain signals and recreate the images. The results weren't always perfect. Think of blurry, dream-like versions of the originals, but still the fact that it works at all is insane. What's even crazier is that this isn't just limited to just things you're actively looking at. Some studies have shown that it's possible to reconstruct images from memory or even dreams. Like, imagine one day being able to wake up and literally replay your dreams on a screen. Goodbye, therapy journal, hello, dream YouTube channel. But of course, this raises a lot of ethical questions. If we can reconstruct images from brain activity, how far are we from being able to read people's private thoughts? What happens to privacy when your brain can be hacked or decoded? And who gets access to this tech? Scientists, governments, corporations? It's giving dystopian surveillance vibes, and the potential for misuse is huge. On the flip side, there are also some amazing potential benefits. For people who are nonverbal or locked in due to conditions like ALS, this technology could be a game changer. They could use it to communicate by translating their mental images into something others can see and understand. It could also revolutionize art, allowing people to paint directly from their imagination, or even help us understand mental health issues by giving a clearer picture of how the brain visualizes and processes information. Right now, this tech is still in its infancy. The reconstructions are rough, and the process requires big, clunky equipment like fMRI machines, which are not exactly practical for everyday use. But as AI and neuroscience neuroscience advance, it's not hard to imagine this tech becoming way more accurate and accessible in the future. It's like we're standing at the edge of something that could completely change how we think about consciousness, creativity, and even reality itself. Next up, we got brain in a vat. This is the ultimate what-if scenario that's basically the OG simulation theory. It's a classic thought experiment in philosophy that will really have you questioning your entire existence and whether anything you're experiencing is even real. It's giving like Matrix vibes, but let's get into this. The premise is simple but pretty wild. Imagine your brain has been removed from your body and placed in a vat of life-sustaining fluid. Scientists, or maybe some evil AI depending on how dystopian you want to get, hook it up to a supercomputer that sends electrical signals directly to your neurons. These signals are identical to the ones your brain would normally receive from your senses like sight, touch, sound, etc. The computer is so advanced that it creates a totally realistic simulation of the world, and as far as you know, you're still living your normal life. But here's the kicker, you're not. You're just a brain floating in a vat, being fed fake inputs. The brain in a vat idea messes with the question of what's real. If your brain can't tell the difference between signals coming from the real world and ones generated by a computer, how do you know that anything you experience is real? Like, how do you know that you're not already in the vat? And spoiler, you can't prove that you're not. This thought experiment comes from discussions in epistemology, which is the study of knowledge, and metaphysics, and is often used to explore questions about skepticism and reality. The brain in a vat is essentially a modern spin on the evil demon scenario from the 17th century, where this guy René Descartes wondered if an all-powerful demon could be deceiving us about everything. But instead of demons, now we've got vats and computers. And yeah, it's closely tied to simulation theory, where the idea is that we could all be living in a super advanced computer simulation. Philosophers like Nick Bostrom have even argued that it's statistically more likely that we're in a simulation than not. Like, what if advanced civilizations in the future created countless simulations of their ancestors, which is us, for research or entertainment? Odds are we could be in one of those simulations right now. Next up, we got the spatio-temporal decoding of animal position and orientation, which is a mouthful, but basically it's about using brain activity to figure out exactly where an animal is and how it's moving in its environment. Imagine being able to track an animal's position, posture, and even direction just by reading its neural signals. Wild, right? So in neuroscience, there's been a ton of work on understanding how the brain maps the world around us. This is all about those place cells and grid cells you might have heard of. These cells are like the brain's GPS. They light up depending on where the animal is in a given space. Scientists can tap into these signals using technologies like electrophysiology, which are tiny electrodes in the brain, or calcium imaging, which is using light to track neural activity. With spatiotemporal decoding, researchers take it a step further. They use advanced algorithms and machine learning to analyze these neural signals and reconstruct the exact position and orientation of an animal in real time. Like, instead of just saying this mouse is somewhere near the corner, they can decode brain activity to say this mouse is 3 inches from the wall facing north and wagging its tail like it's excited about cheese. Now, how do they decode it? It's all about patterns. When an animal moves, different neurons fire in specific sequences. Scientists map these patterns to physical positions and orientations using huge data sets. The spatio part is about the where, like spatial location in a maze or an open field, and the temporal part is about timing, how the firing patterns evolve as the animal moves. Put it together and you get a detailed neural map of not just where the animal is, but how it's moving through space. Now, why is this a big deal? So it's a big deal for understanding navigation. This tech gives us a front row seat to how brains handle navigation. It's like watching the brain's GPS in action, which could help explain everything from how animals find their way home to why sometimes you walk into a room and forget why you're there. Also, if we decode movement and orientation from neural data, we could use the same principles to design smarter AI and robots. Think of machines that could learn to navigate environments just like living creatures. And understanding how spatial information is encoded could help with treatments for neurological disorders like Alzheimer's, where spatial memory and navigation break down. Now, there's also an ethical side here. If we can decode neural activity in animals, it's not a huge leap to wonder about decoding human brain activity on this level. Like, what if someone could track your movements just by tapping into your brain signals. It's kind of scary. Next, full duplex optical neural transduction. This is another fucking mouthful, but basically the idea is all about creating a two-way real-time connection, or like communication link between neurons and external devices using light. Unlike traditional neural interfaces that rely on electrical signals, which can be slow and prone to interference, optical methods promise faster, more precise, and less invasive ways to read and write neural activity. Here's how it works. Full duplex means two-way communication, so this tech isn't just about observing what the brain is doing, it's also about sending signals back into the brain to influence its activity. The optical part refers to using light, typically through advanced techniques like optogenetics, where neurons are genetically modified to respond to light. Lasers or LEDs are then used to stimulate or record activity at an insane level of precision. This allows scientists to both monitor and control neural circuits in real time, almost like hacking into the brain's operating system. The potential applications are mind-blowing. Imagine a brain-computer interface that not only lets paralyzed individuals control robotic limbs with their thoughts, but also provides sensory feedback so they can feel the objects they're touching. Or consider the possibilities for treating neurological disorders. Doctors could use this tech to directly modify the brain's electrical activity, offering new ways to treat epilepsy, depression, even Alzheimer's. It could also revolutionize prosthetics by making them feel and function like real limbs, thanks to the seamless exchange of information between the brain and the device. But this isn't just about medicine. Full duplex optical neural transduction could also open the door to enhanced human capabilities like augmented memory, direct brain-to-brain communication, or even immersive virtual reality experiences where your brain directly interacts with the virtual world. The precision and speed of optical communication could make these sci-fi dreams a reality, blurring that line between biology and technology. Of course, there are challenges. This technology requires a level of precision and miniaturization that's still being developed, not to mention ethical questions about privacy, autonomy, and the potential for misuse. If someone can write data to your brain, who gets to decide what's written? The idea of full control over neural activity is both exciting and terrifying, depending on how it's used. Cerebral organoid. Cerebral organoids are basically tiny lab-grown versions of the human brain, and they're as fascinating as they are kind of creepy. These little structures, sometimes called mini-brains, are made from stem cells and mimic some of the basic features of a developing brain. They don't have consciousness or thoughts, let's get that out of the way, but they can replicate certain processes and structures, making them a powerful tool for studying brain development, diseases, and even neuroscience mysteries. Here's how they work. Scientists take induced pluripotent stem cells, which are basically adult cells reprogrammed to behave like embryonic stem cells, and coax them into forming brain tissue. This involves growing them in 3D cultures that provide the right environment for them to organize into layers, much like an actual brain does. Over time, these cells start forming structures that look and function a lot like those found in a real brain, including neurons, synapses, and even some early signs of activity. Why is this such a big deal? Well, for starters, cerebral organoids allow researchers to study the human brain in ways that were impossible before. You can't exactly experiment on living brains, but with organoids, you can model diseases like Alzheimer's, autism, or epilepsy in a controlled environment. Scientists can tweak genes, expose the organoids to drugs, or simulate conditions like infections to see how the brain might react. During the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, cerebral organoids were used to study how the virus affected neural tissue. But it's not just about disease. These mini brains are also helping researchers explore the evolutionary differences between humans and other species. For example, by comparing human cerebral organoids to those made from chimpanzee or Neanderthal cells, scientists can identify what makes our brains unique and why we're capable of things like language, art, and science. Of course, this raises some very big ethical questions. As cerebral organoids become more complex, could they ever reach a point where they develop something resembling consciousness? Right now, they don't have the full architecture or connectivity of a real brain, so that's not a concern, but as the technology advances, it's something researchers are starting to think about. Where do we draw the line between studying the brain and potentially creating something that is a brain? And then there's the question of how this technology might be used in the future. Could we eventually use cerebral organoids to test drugs before they ever go to clinical trials, making medicine safer and more efficient? Or could they be used for more dystopian purposes, like creating bioengineered brain tissue for artificial intelligence systems or experiments in consciousness that push ethical boundaries? We'll just have to be careful. Next up, we got brain surgery in ancient Greece. This might sound like an oxymoron, like how were people doing brain surgery without modern tech? But it turns out that Greek physicians, particularly during the classical period, were pulling off some surprisingly advanced procedures using tools and techniques that laid the groundwork for modern neurosurgery. The Greeks inherited a lot of medical knowledge from earlier civilizations like the Egyptians and Mesopotamians, but they took it further by combining practical surgical skills with philosophical and scientific inquiry. The most famous figure in ancient Greek medicine, Hippocrates, yeah, the do no harm guy, wrote extensively about head injuries in his medical texts. He understood that the brain was a critical organ and linked it to bodily functions and to mental processes, though he didn't even know the full scope of his role. Hippocrates was also one of the first to recommend surgical intervention for skull fractures and head trauma, which were pretty common thanks to warfare and accidents. The most common brain-related procedure in ancient Greece was trepanation, which we talked about already, so I'm not going to get into that too much. The Greeks' understanding of the brain was still pretty limited by today's standards. For example, some Greek philosophers like Aristotle thought the heart was the seat of thought and emotion, while the brain was more of a cooling system for the blood. But Hippocrates and others, like the anatomist Herophilus, which came later and during the Hellenistic period, had a more accurate view. He dissected human bodies and identified parts of the brain, like the ventricles, which he associated with mental processes. Herophilus is considered one of the first neuroscientists for his detailed work on the nervous system. The Greeks' approach to brain surgery wasn't perfect, though they didn't have germ theory, so infection was a huge risk, and their tools and methods were limited by the technology of the time, but it was still impressive how good they did with what they had. And that is the end of this neuroscience oddities iceberg, guys. I hope you enjoyed this one. This one was really fun to make. It's a bit longer for my channel, but you know, I loved making it, guys, so I hope you guys liked watching it. I hope you all have a great night. Sweet dreams.